good comes from the UFO field for him. This is a reluctant UFO messiah. It changed his life.
This week we've heard the contention of UFO researchers that there's a secret government within our government.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
The live interview with the shadowy Dennis drew international attention. Portions were broadcast by radio in 6 European countries and in a nationally televised TV special in Japan. Despite numerous inquiries and feelers, Dennis has remained anonymous until now. His real name is Robert Lazar. He says he was hired to work at an area called S4, which is a few miles south of Groom Lake. At S4, he says, are flying saucers, antimatter reactors, and other working examples of technology that is seemingly beyond human capabilities.
I did not believe that this should be a security matter. Some of it, sure. But just the concept that there's definite proof. We even have articles from another world, another system. You just can't not tell everyone.
It was like a Twilight Zone episode. It just kept getting stranger. The fact that that was happening at all was the weirdest part. Look, it's been 30 years, and all of a sudden you raised it to this level. You know, this is a powerful technology, fearsome technology, and you just don't want everyone to have it. It'll become obvious how to make constructive as well as destructive devices from it. It's my only guess as to why they have never released information. It's kind of difficult. Once you release the technology to be analyzed and give it to everyone, they can just run with it. You really can't keep the weapon potential hidden. You really can't. Look, with ET technology, you can literally rule the world.
Well, I am telling the truth. I've tried to prove that. What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. You're talking about contact, physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence. That's got to be the biggest event in history, period.
And it's real.
And it's real and it's there.
Hi guys, and welcome to another edition of The Kevin Moore Show. Now on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my 2 guests. They are Jeremy Reese and Dan Benkert. Now both Jeremy and Dan have been heavily studying the Bob Lazar story for many years now. And of course, Jeremy Corbell has just released his new movie, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. So we're going to talk about all stuff Bob Lazar, the pros and cons to the story. So without further ado, Dan and Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hey, Kevin. How you doing?
Thanks for having us.
It's great to have you both on, man. It really is. Okay, let's just before we start as well, let's just get a bit of background here as well, just on, well, let's start with yourself first, Dan. Let's just get a bit, well, Jeremy, sorry, let's start with you. Let's get a bit of background on yourself, please.
All
right, well, let's see, my name's Jeremy, Jeremy Riss, R-Y-S. I've been studying UFOs and kind of extreme, science-related conspiracy topics probably for 10 years now. I think I started in 2004, 2005 with 9/11 and Bill Cooper's book. Stuff about, the Federal Reserve and the JFK assassination, and also aliens and stuff like that. And that just kind of got me interested in researching all this. Before that, I was into physics, and I had gone to school for physics straight out of high school, and was majoring in that. Took a couple years off. Tried to figure out my life. I did a lot of construction. Is mainly what I've been doing for work, because it pays the bills and stuff, and I like working with my hands and building stuff. But my passion's always been in learning stuff about science and technology. Went back and got my physics degree and graduated in 2012, part because of the nudging of one of me and Dan's old friends, Edgar Fouché, who's guy who claimed he worked out at Area 51, U.S. military. He didn't work on himself on classified programs, but he knew a lot of other people that had information, and he shared a lot of that when he went public in 1998, and that's a whole nother topic in and of itself, because me and Dan, we disagree on a lot of things with the Edgar Fouché case, and what exactly happened there. But I mean, what I've taken away from it is the metamaterials and quasi-crystals stuff that he was talking about is really advanced on a whole nother level than really a lot of the other technology and stuff. But I've been interested in approaching this from just a scientific standpoint, and really my goal is to I've taken on a lot of this, like, skeptics, and people call me, I guess, a debunker and a skeptic, and in a lot of ways I am, because I've been to be that way through experience, and also I try to present these cases to a more scientific minded audience, and filter out and analyze stuff for what is the best evidence, what's the best information out there, and what will hold up to a scientific audience and stuff. So that's kind of where my whole approach to this subject and background in this has been. And of course, Bob has been a very popular case. I heard about him, I think, on Unsolved Mysteries, or some of those old shows back in the 90s that featured a lot of the stuff, UFO related stuff. And Bob Lazar's case has always been a very popular one. It's never been erased. They said that if the government was so capable of erasing all his degrees and everything, I just don't understand how they couldn't have just why much other information getting censored. But I don't see that happening with this Bob Lazar stuff. I see it quite well advertised. But again, I'm getting into what our discussion is on, and not giving you a clear, and I should talk more about me too. I mean, I could talk more about me. I do construct. I clear up a couple things too, because there's people saying, like, oh, who is this guy who does construction? How can he be a physicist who does construction? Well, I only have a bachelor's degree in physics, and in order to really get into the field, I'd have to go back and to grad school and get a graduate degree in a specific discipline, and go into some sort of technical field. And really, a lot of the for those who aren't aware of what's out there, it's really just doesn't bridge with my interests. It's kind of I'm a hands-on guy, but I'm more interested stuff as just to learn and know more. And and if I were to go into industry and work in a kind of technical capacity in a field, and especially now, it's really hard for me to turn around and do that at 36 years old, to say like, oh, well, I want to go to grad school and get this degree, and where I'd be competing for a job in a position in fields with, kids who are younger than me, and probably more, they say you kind of pass your prime as a physicist or a mathematician by 28, at least historically. Most mathematicians have done all their best work before the age of 28. So it's really I've kind of especially not having a lot of experience and work experience in the directly in the field of science and technology, it would be kind of harder for me to try to jump into that game. It's kind of like where I stand. I do construction. I build stuff. And it's not just easy stuff either. There's all kinds of stuff that I've done in construction, and learning how to build pretty much anything. That's pretty much what I wanted. I've passioned myself on doing is learning how do I build. I want to learn how to take anything apart and how to build anything. and my goal of course ultimately is to build a spacecraft and get us the hell out of here. But,
I think you'll find most physicists, that's what they do. They take stuff apart, don't they? In one sense as well. But you've had a massive passion as well for the Bob Lazar story. What's your take on how do you feel what the Bob Lazar story does to the field in general, the community in general? Because you would class yourself as being part of the community, wouldn't you?
I would say, it's I mean, what is the modern community is around. There's three main pillars of, was Roswell, Bob Lazar, and I guess the Disclosure Project or something, for a while there until it's kind of splintered and gone all these other directions, and with the secret space program stuff that's out there, and all this other stuff. But I guess my whole thing has been just like, well, where's the science? Where's the beef? Like, where's something we can actually like learn something from or test or so that's kind of my whole where I'm at right now.
Yeah, but wasn't there a time when you were younger that you felt that that you had believed some of this stuff, and that you now look at the younger generation coming in, and you feel that they're just being misled by not by the right kind of science in a sense when it comes to this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. It's kind of like we also talked about this the other night with me and you, how it's almost like a lesson in discernment for people too. It's one of those hard things that you have to really look at and think about, because you have this guy, Bob, who's so sincere and so honest sounding, so believable. Really, if you were just to judge based on his character, his actions, and his words and his statements, whether he's telling the truth or not, I would say this guy's telling the truth, hands down. I mean, listen to him talk. But it's only when you really examine the details do you learn. It's like, well, honesty and truthfulness doesn't depend on any of those things. All those feelings, all those, gut, in my gut, I believe he's telling the truth. That doesn't matter. That's not the test. That's not the litmus test. Science has a whole, and just in logic in general, philosophy, critical thinking.
Yeah. Well, I was saying that to you because I know how
And I agree, because it's like I look at myself 10 years ago, as a kid growing up and getting interested in this stuff and having an interest in it. And I see all these younger kids, getting into this stuff too now. And it's hard once you've gone down that path and that rabbit hole, and you've invested, 10 years, not, years of your life into believing something that is in all sense a lie. You're believing a lie. It's very hard to convince people change their ways of thinking and unlearn all the mess of nonsense that they've put and they've filled their head with, because it's like they're learning the wrong things, and they're learning so much of it they become indoctrinated and ingrained in this sort of belief system. It's where it's no longer it's no longer just a belief. It's like a religion almost, to a lot of these people. I see it happening out there with this stuff. And
and they're not able to discern, are they? That's the problem. When it gets religious-y, this discernment just goes out the window. And
right, it's belief at that point, and then and then they attack people who don't share their beliefs or who question or uphold their beliefs.
Absolutely. Now, thank you for that. Let me just bring Dan on here in here as well. Dan, if you just how did you get interested in the whole UFO subject as well? Because Bob Lazar's been on your radar for a very long time as well. The story hasn't it?
I'd say it was probably my uncle who got me into UFOs. He had told about a UFO he had seen up by 3 Mile Island one time. I'm from Pennsylvania, and if most people know what 3 Mile Island is, TMI, that's where they had the nuclear accident in the United States here back in '79. And he had seen a UFO while he was fishing up there one time in the river. And it just kind of piqued my curiosity. Probably, I'm talking about when I'm like 5, 6 years old, and I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, so we didn't have the internet era we have now. But between that and then, in 1989, well, I'll tell you another platform that got me interested in UFOs was the show Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack. Man, they had all cases on there. It's still a great resource to go back and look at Unsolved Mysteries, to look into all the UFO cases that people like the Cash Landrum case, people haven't even heard of today. I get pretty deep in it. I'll get on a case and I'll spend a year on just one case. I mean, I try to talk to the people involved, do as much as I can. Bob came around in '89, was on Unsolved Mysteries on a number of different TV shows. I was with the dentist and saw the Area 51, I believe, on the cover of Life magazine or Time magazine. It was lit up at night. It's an incredible picture back in '89. And excuse me, that began like a whole new interest for me in UFOs when Bob came out, really. I mean, Area 51 to me was just like, wow, oh my God, there's this place that exists in the middle of the desert no one knows about. Holy moly, Then the internet, in the late '90s and the early 2000s, when the internet really started to blossom, when it didn't take a half an hour to download a photograph, I started just researching everything I possibly could on Area 51, just everything. People like Peter Merlin, Glenn Campbell, the people that were out at Area 51 back in the day doing the research, listening to what they have to say, and just literally just watching everything I could, and reading everything I could about Area 51.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we look at Bob Lazar, I mean, he did put Area 51 on the map. For sure.
Yeah, him and John Lear, Knapp, and Huff definitely put Area 51 on the map. Bob mainly did. Whether that was done on purpose or not, in my mind.
You mean whether that was disinformation coming from these people on purpose?
Well, yeah, I mean, I know people that absolutely believe it's a controlled leak that live in Las Vegas and are part of the John Lear inner circle, and they believe that it was purposely leaked to Lear. So he would disclose it, and Lear talks about that in an interview. He talks about how they knew that he would blab, as he states, the story to people, but there's too many things that have to line up for that to take place for me to even consider believing that.
So you and Jeremy have known each other for many years. Yep. And
10 years.
10 years. And that was all through Ed Fouché. That was through that gentleman, yeah? Yep.
Yeah.
And you were a very close friend of Ed as well. And what was he? Why was he so special to you in this community, would you say?
Ed's known for the term TR3B wouldn't even be a term today if it was not for Ed. Ed's the one that is the first one that said TR3B. He disclosed the technology as he knew it, as he was told. Remember, there's a difference between saying Ed worked on the craft and the technology as he knew it. He
Right.
was he disclosed in 1998 at the IUFOC, which can be seen everywhere, and was on the UFO circuit for a little bit, was on a number of different TV shows. And I actually saw Ed in 1998 on Riddles of the Sky on the Learning Channel at my home, and have it recorded on a VCR tape sitting probably about 10 feet away from me right now, but I don't have a VCR to play it in.
Where I learned about Ed Fouché first was from a presentation called "The Case for Anti-Gravity," which I think came out in like 2004. And in it, towards the end, the guy was talking about the mercury plasma centrifuge engine, and he was talking about quasi-crystals and metamaterials. And I was like, quasi-crystals and metamaterials? I never heard of those before. And as soon as I started looking them up and reading all the scientific applications for what they could be used for, I was like, who the fuck is this guy? You know, one of those.
It's kind of weird because I met Ed through Jeremy's posting of Ed's IUFOC presentation, which he posted in 7 parts. And Jeremy put part 1 up, and it was kind of funny. I was like, "Hey man, when are you gonna put part 2 up?" And that's when I met Jeremy. Subsequently, like a day later, I met Ed because Ed was reading the comments, and Ed and I started talking. He said, "Go get a webcam," and I didn't have a webcam at the time, and went and got one, and I couldn't believe it. He gave me his phone number, and I got online, and there was Edgar Fouché sitting right where you are right now on camera talking to me. I was kind of shocked because I'd studied this story a great deal of massive flying triangles like the Belgian War.
Well, let me ask you both this, because I know we've got so much to talk about right now, and I know this is going to go on for a little while, this conversation, and I really appreciate both your time, right? But in the field that we're in right now, okay, so there's me. I'm doing a documentary right now, which is the sort of kind of first documentary to go against the whistleblower in our community. That's the Mark Richard documentary. But in general, how much misinformation do you think there is out there? And I'll ask that to both of you.
How much misinformation is out there that I see? I mean, at least 95% of it. It'd probably be closer to 99%, because it's just like the very little bit that I have seen that is like real genuine information is it exists out there. It's slim, but it's not put in the mainstream. It's in fact, it's real boring and dull. If you look at the real factual information on, like, to do like real factual research on stuff, it's real boring and tedious information. It's not. Most of the stuff out there is entertainment. I'd say 99% of it is for entertainment, and it's just to tickle your brain and make you be like, we're not alone, and or whatever the angle is. That there's different versions of it. There's the version that aliens are going to save the world and all its problems. There's the version that these people are out there trying to get the truth out, and that it's this evil government covering all this stuff up, and that everyone in the government is corrupt and knows all this information, which I don't think is the case either. I think it's very compartmentalized of what certain people do know, and I don't think anyone really knows anything for sure, intelligence-wise, when it comes to this subject, as far as extraterrestrial stuff. I see a lot of it being used and manipulated by the intelligence community and the Air Force in particular, for counterintelligence purposes, to distract and discredit people who do research into classified programs and what really goes on. It's a lot of it's counterintelligence. Was used a great deal as counter during the 1950s and 60s, to cover up CIA programs like the Ox Cart and the U-2 spy plane operations. It's interesting if you really look at all the history of it, and then. But this is just my personal opinion again. I think that, from what I know about the science of metamaterials and in quasi-crystals, it wouldn't be outside the realm of technological feasibility to have cloaking devices, active invisibility cloaks. So it's really, if it's an extraterrestrial craft, and it can travel interstellar distances to get across those vast, expanses of space to get from their alien home planet to our world, then for sure they have the technology to turn themselves invisible. They just hide from us and our radar, and it's not that hard, considering the technology and the material science that's involved that we know of. But I really think a lot of it's 90%, 99% is disinformation, and it's to cover up for not. Well, I wouldn't say it's misinformation and disinformation. I wouldn't say, because a lot of it's just people doing entertainment, and they're misinformed themselves, and they're just posting this stuff for entertainment purposes or for monetary gains. Really, like channels like Secure Team 10 or Third Phase of the Moon. Very obvious that they aren't very knowledgeable about what's actually going on or what's real, and the science or anything like that. But it's really interesting because drones and the drone technology is been taking off in secret. It's probably number one, U.S. Air Force and DARPA. What DARPA's money at for classified programs for past 5 to 10 years. A lot of it's in drones. Are the same programs that developed the Global Hawk, the Predator drone, and all these other unmanned aerial vehicles, the UAVs. But there's also even more classified ones, surveillance drones, drones with some technology maybe built inside them that has some very high capabilities, and stuff that we're beyond. And of course, what's the best cover for classified projects like that? UFOs. To say that they're all just UFOs, and not all of those classified drones, UAVs, are ours. They don't all belong to the U.S. There's some that belong to other foreign entities, which are a threat to the U.S. And this whole thing with the Pentagon coming out with a guy saying that there's this advanced aerial threat identification program, and this whole new framing of the language out there to start getting people to think about these things in terms of advanced aerial threats. I think a lot of it's counterintelligence from the Pentagon and counter surveillance, active counter surveillance, getting the youth of today interested in thinking they're filming UFOs or reporting on UFOs and reporting these UFOs to apps. And really, the U.S. Air Force is undoubtedly using that data for some purposes of their own, intelligence collection, what's flying around in our skies.
Well, let me put that question to Dan as well, just very briefly, Dan, because we're going to get into the Bob Lazar stuff. What's your take on misinformation, disinformation out there right now?
We consider the internet. I mean, look at YouTube, for example. Okay, I used to use YouTube as a tool back when it first came out and look at UFO videos, and I would spend all day looking at videos and try to evaluate what is an airplane and what's a UFO, or what am I looking at. And nowadays it's just ridiculous. It's all fake. I used to believe everything. Now I don't believe hardly anything at all. It doesn't matter what UFO story it is. I pretty much don't believe any of them anymore. I mean, the major ones that are out there, because as he said, if you're looking into a fake UFO story, you're not going to look at what the Department of Defense is actually doing now, are you? You're not going to look at what programs are actually going on at the Tonopah test range, and you're wasting all this time looking at Bob Lazar.
Or Area 51, like he was saying before about the whole thing with Area 51 as being, this is a cover story. It's like a lot of people knew about Area 51. I guess Bob Lazar really officially put it on the map and made it like blew the thing out of the water. And there's arguments on both sides of that. Maybe that he did kind of blow up there and cost them, billions of dollars in operational security, because they have to move all those top secret test flight programs from Area 51 to other facilities. But it's also possible that those sort of activities were already moved far away from Area 51 into other locations, and that this was just a a red herring to get everyone looking at the wrong place.
Let's start from the scratch here then, for the audience that don't know about the Bob Lazar story. Let's go back. Let's begin with John. Now, John Lear, who I've interviewed in person and had him on the show as well, right? He was supplying, I believe. He was on an early talk show with George Knapp. Who's a reporter in Vegas and also a co-host of Coast to Coast AM. So let's get this right. So John Lear was sneaking into areas of Area 51. Was he on the border or something of Area 51 and taking photographs and supplying them to George Knapp? Is that the kind of where we want to start?
He's the first one that photographed Area 51. He literally drove right up to the lake bed. The photographs are online and was taking photographs of it. And
this was before they had any security. I mean, this was before
security. There were guys that came up to him at one point, but you got to remember, John just pulled out a badge that he had. He used to fly over the Nevada nuclear test site. He was a pilot that would fly over, and when they detonate nukes, he would have detection equipment and stuff like that hooked to an aircraft that they'd obviously give him, and it would monitor what was being released into the atmosphere and all this stuff like that. He was at Area 51, but for the nuclear test site up there. And he began talking to George Knapp on a show that George Knapp had. It was on a local cable station. If you have, I don't know in England how it is, but around here we have local cable stations on the record. And George Knapp put John Lear on there, and just all of a sudden, just people started calling, like insanity took off. The amount of people that were interested in the subject was so much more than he possibly could imagine. And John Lear was the one that really, Bob Lazar's story put it on the map because he was on the news, but John Lear was disclosing it to George Knapp on the record, about Area 51, all the test sites up there, and he pulled map. It was when Lear was very sharp too. He was back in the day. He's an incredible pilot.
Let me ask you this: why do you? And whoever wants to answer this can answer this. Why do you think George Knapp took an interest in John Lear? I mean, was George Knapp a bit of a conspiracy theorist? Do you think?
As the story goes, John Lear went to talk to a guy named Ned Day, who was George Knapp's mentor at KLAS TV 8 in Las Vegas, and wanted to do a story about a guy that worked up at the test site, and a story about Area 51 and so forth. And Ned Day didn't want any parts of it because he couldn't verify who this guy was and if the story was true and so forth. And George Knapp was young at the time, and he was sitting in there supposedly and jumped on the story. So that's been told, but y'all also hear.
Yeah, but even Knapp says in some of those interviews too, Dan, that like he was doing these shows, and he was doing these late night shows, and they weren't, nobody listened, nobody was tuning in. And then once he got John Lear on, they started talking about all this stuff. He started getting lots of attention. So that it also kind of like revealed like his motives for why he's like got into this as a young reporter. Realized that.
My question would be which way did it take place? When he went to KLAS, he had already been supposedly talking to George Knapp, or did George Knapp then bring him on that show on the record? I don't know. Also, John Lear ran for Senate at one time. I don't know, on the Republican ticket. There's a lot about John Lear people don't know. His father, William P. Lear, invented the Learjet. He comes from a very John Lear was a contract CIA pilot through the Cassie.
Let's not forget that.
Air America.
Let's not forget that I mean, he admitted that, he admits that, well, he admitted it to me when I was with him face to face, he works for the CIA. So,
He's an intelligence background, his photographs of everything to back it up too. He's not bullshitting.
Oh, he's not bullshitting. No, he's not bullshitting. So let's bring Bob in here then. So where was Bob living at the time when John was going on that show, and how and I believe when John went on the early morning talk show for George Knapp, Bob must have already met John by then.
I'm not totally sure about that because Bob Lazar, let's see here, he met John Lear in 1988 when Gene Huff, for some reason, called John Lear on the phone and asked him, he goes, can we trade? I'll trade you some UFO tapes for a home appraisal. Called John Lear on the phone and asked him why, hey, do you need a home appraisal on this gigantic home he has that he had just bought? The guest house is bigger than most people's houses on Hollywood Boulevard in Las Vegas. I've always questioned that motive of why Gene Huff called Lear up and said, hey, I'll trade you a home appraisal for a copy of your UFO tapes. Back then it was VCR tapes. That was it. To me, it would be like, why would you think a Lear back then would need money? Why would you think John Lear? And they knew who he was. They knew he was part of that Learjet family, had that giant home. And John didn't want to do it at first because his wife had become sick of all the UFO people around. I mean, John got into this UFO thing big time. The first thing he was involved in was like the cattle mutilation stuff, and him and Linda Howe, and they talked about that stuff on the record with George Knapp. But then he got in from the secret bases and all that stuff. But Bob Lazar met John Lear in the summer of 1988, June, I believe, if I'm correct. And Bob Lazar was known as Bob the Photo Guy. Gene Huff would do home appraisals, and Bob would be the guy that would help him go around and measure the homes. And he would also take photographs of the home and develop them because Bob had a photo processing service.
And the real estate companies were using that photo company to process their photos. Quite a number of them were. So when Bob goes around and meets John Lear through Gene Huff doing the appraisal on the house, and just for us Brits, the appraisal, what was the purpose for that? To raise capital from the house or something?
John said that at the time he had needed money, and so he took the guy on it, even though his wife
said he was looking to get a second mortgage, essentially. It's like refinance his house. So he needed an appraisal for that.
Thank you, Jeremy. So let me get this right. So then when Bob is doing the measurements, or whatever that is, right? Whatever they're doing, Gene Huff's with John, and they're talking about UFO stuff, and somewhere along the line in that conversation, Bob says, "Oh, you don't believe in that rubbish," personifying Lowe's here.
You guys are nuts if you believe in that. But what's kind of weird is they knew they were going over there to talk about UFOs. Gene Huff obviously had to have told Bob, hey, we're going over here to trade some UFO tapes for this home appraisal. This is John Lear, Learjet family fame, he had said, I worked at Los Alamos. I'd know about it if UFOs were true and you guys are insane. There is no such thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So was at that time, Bob had previously, before he started the photo lab place, had been working at Los Alamos?
Bob worked at Los Alamos in 1983 through Kirk Meyer, a subcontractor. And my belief is he was doing from everything I've researched, he was reviewing alpha probes for Los Alamos. And those alpha probes were used at Area 51 and the surrounding test sites because of nuclear fallout that they would have, and they would have to monitor these, and the contract was for 300 every 6 weeks. John helped them rebuild them at one time.
Okay, let's try to connect the dots here a little bit. So in Jeremy Corbell's film, which is Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, in the outtakes, and also on Jeremy Corbell's website, there is an interview with a guy that worked at Los Alamos who confirms that he knew that Bob Lazar was working there, right? A guy, Jeremy, just remind me of that guy's... Yes, just say that name again.
Richard Krangle, yeah. Dr. Richard Krangle, K-R-A-N-G-L-E, yeah. He's a real physicist.
Now, he's a real physicist. Now, Krangle does state that he remembers seeing Bob Lazar there. He doesn't know what Bob Lazar was doing there. He presumes he was a physicist, the way that he talked and came across. They shared security briefings together, but they were in a big auditoriums, right? It wasn't like a little class. It was, it was just briefings and, don't talk about what you're doing here, don't share things.
Dr. Krangle, and I'm an engineering physicist. I've done contracts up at Los Alamos pretty much all through the 80s. I still do contracts with Los Alamos. Not as many as used to, but I still, have some contact up there. We didn't work together, but, cafeteria kind of thing, you pass them. In some of the commander's call, if you will, meetings, you pass them. So yeah, he was up there. We didn't work together. Well, he was a physicist, which I'm a physicist. We kind of recognize each other. It's the classic, pocket condom with all the proper different colored pens. So that's, he fit that mold. If nobody would have told me he's a physicist, one look, he's a physicist. He's properly dressed in geekdom.
Ken Friedman talked to Dr. Krangle, and there's a recording of it that used to be on YouTube that I can no longer find. The interview that Stanton Friedman and Dr. Krangle had came out, there was a completely different outcome than the one Corbell has. Corbell, when he interviewed him, Krangle said that he thought that Bob was a physicist because of his pocket protector. He looked the part. I've seen this happen before in companies I've worked at where people think a guy's an engineer, he's a quality control technician.
It wasn't specifically that the way that Bob talked or came across, but it was the way that other people talked about Bob or referred to Bob, and it was, oh, that's Bob that was working on such and such, and a lot of it revolved around the Bob drawing a lot of attention to himself with his jet car, and the stuff that he was doing there. But it's interesting that Eric Davis did a lot of classified work out at Area 51 and was doing presumably employed, I think, by EG&G at the time, Dana, or something. And he's the guy that said that Bob was nothing but a radiation health monitor out at Area 51. He posted that whole that story about Bob Lazar made up his entire cockamamie story. There's like a whole article on it somewhere. I forget you could.
But Jeremy, that's Area 51 though. Let's just go back to Los Alamos, right?
Yeah, he's talking about it at Los Alamos.
Sorry, Los Alamos. That's in New Mexico.
Los Alamos is in New Mexico.
New Mexico, Albuquerque,
Nevada.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so in Los Angeles, so John, in one of John Lear's interviews with Project Camelot, he talks about that he was repairing these alpha probes with Bob.
Yeah, so in that interview, he basically says they had 300 alpha probes that they would repair, and then they'd drive out 16 hours, I believe, from Las Vegas to New Mexico, Las Vegas, Nevada, to Los Alamos, New Mexico. It's like a 16-hour drive. You can plug it into a GPS and calculate it. But they used to drive out all that way to Los Alamos every 6 weeks to go and drop off and these 300 repaired alpha probes, and I presumably pick up 300 more broken ones or used up. Would have to go home and re-outfit and repair and then bring back.
But where does that fit in with the story of the physicist that Corbell was able to appraise that knew that Bob was at Los Alamos? Where does fixing alpha probes fit into Bob being there at Los Alamos?
Yeah, so if he's doing, if he's involved with the radiation health monitoring, he would probably presumably go to standard security briefings with the rest of the staff there. I again, just because he went to one of these security briefings doesn't mean he was involved on any sort of classified programs or any capacity. And the fact that Stanton Friedman showed that he was affiliated with Kirk Meyer Corporation points more strongly to the idea that he was they're involved with radiation health monitoring, a technician, or an electronics technician, as his background, and his educational background is more shows that he took electronics courses and had a lot of knowledge of electronics and stuff like that.
You
So
can even pull
that's
the ad up from the Los Alamos monitor where Kirk Meyer was hiring electronics technician for Los Alamos. Los Alamos had the contract to rebuild these alpha probes, which had to be looked at and rebuilt, whether they were in perfect condition or not, every 6 weeks because they're monitoring radiation. And anyone that's been in it, I've worked in a technical environment my whole life. I have an associate's degree in electronics. You have to have calibrated equipment. There's dates on everything, and everything's got to be calibrated. That testing you're doing, especially if you're doing stuff for the military, you better hope that your equipment has a calibration date on that's within the time you're working, or everything you're doing is thrown out the window. Basically, every 6 weeks, these things would have to be rebuilt. They'd wrap aluminum foil around the outside of them and put 2 new wires in them. They're very simple. There's a diagram of them online that can be seen. And Los Alamos had the contract to do it for Area 51. Bob's boss was a female lady who would go to Area 51 herself, but Bob, she said, didn't go to Area 51. That comes for Dr. Eric Davis, who ironically was in Jeremy Corbell Kenyon Lockyer's Skinwalker Ranch movie. And he's been a huge critic of Bob. He knows the people that Bob worked for. He's told this story about how Bob knew the people that were going to Area 51, but he wasn't going there himself. He didn't have the clearance, and he didn't need to go there. He was just rebuilding the probes. There's no reason for him to go there. And Bob's female boss, that can be the way Bob knew how everything worked at Area 51, because obviously people talk. Oh, you go to that secret base up there in the desert? Yes, I do. Tell me about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. So he's fixing the alpha probes. That contract probably lasts for so long, and then he's setting up his own photo processing lab in Vegas. I believe that's where he set that up. Is that right?
Actually, he took that photo processing company from Tracy Merck. Tracy Merck owned that company, I believe. She owned the photo processing.
Set it up for her. He claims he set that business up for her, and Tracy Merck was Bob's second wife.
Right. So and when did Bob's first wife pass away? Carol.
Carol passed away in 1986, allegedly of a suicide by carbon in their garage in Las Vegas. And Bob,
she was supposed to have the late stages of cancer. Was that the rumor?
I've never heard that before. Where did you hear that at?
On a documentary, one of Bob Lazar's documentaries for the History Channel.
Wow, I've never even seen Bob bring her up on a documentary.
Yeah, she was supposed to have had, well, unless I'm thinking it was George Knapp doing one of his talks at an Exopolitics, but it was one of the two, a History Channel or Exopolitics with George Knapp. Yes, apparently she was meant to have had cancer, and through depression, she committed suicide, and she left a suicide note as well.
Okay. Well,
I think this was from Bob Lazar.
I've never heard Bob even bring her up. I've heard George talk about her very, very briefly and said that he thought that Bob off a little bit, her committing suicide. That's, her name was Carol Nadine Strong was her maiden name, but Carol Lazar. She was born in 1946. She's 13 years older than Bob was born in, Bob was born in 59.
And I believe she used to work at Fairchild Industries back in, for a number of years.
So did Bob, supposedly, as electronics tech.
Well, actually, did Jeremy Corbell look at Bob Lazar's certificates not being available at MIT and what was the other college he was meant to have gone to?
Caltech,
Caltech.
MIT.
No, just for us Brits as well, right? And for other people that may not know this, what is Caltech? What is MIT?
MIT and Caltech are the probably the top two technical universities in the United States. They represent, Caltech on the West Coast and MIT on the East Coast. And they, been around it's probably like the Ivy League of, science colleges, really. I mean, as far as, there are a lot of science stuff that goes on at Harvard and other Ivy League schools, but MIT and Caltech are like probably the top two technical schools in the country. And a lot of scientists are trained at these universities. A lot of famous historical scientists, physicists have come from Caltech and MIT. Richard I recruited out of MIT at age 18 to go work on the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos to develop the atomic bomb. Later on in life, was a professor at Caltech towards the end of his life. So yeah, it's these two schools are probably the two top colleges in the country for a technical and science background. It'd be very prestigious to have gone to either one. Most people go to one or the other. I don't think I've ever heard of anyone going to both. It's kind of like you go to Harvard, you don't also go to Yale. Typically, sometimes there are exceptions, but it's kind of like you stick with one. Once you're one of these schools, you generally stick to being one of them or the other. So it's interesting that he claims to have degrees from both of them, including the degree from Caltech and a discipline that doesn't even exist. They offer an electrical engineering program, but they don't offer any degrees in electronics or electronics technology.
He had a master's degree in electronics technology, and it's funny because I'm associate.
That's a technical school. That's like an associate's degree.
I have an associate degree in electronics technology, which makes me laugh because
that's a 2-year degree. That's like that's a.
He would have an engineering degree if he went to Caltech.
Right.
Do you know where Caroline passed away? Where Bob was at the time?
I believe they had just purchased a house in California, and
so it was California.
They were both living in California at the time, and they had just purchased a house. I could look it up and find out.
It's okay. Don't. This is sort of minutiae sort of kind of things. But what the reason for that was, I believe then, if it was California, and where Bob left California, he's saying that he left behind a lot of stuff at the house, including his certificates.
Right. But time he would have been going to MIT in 1982. We're supposedly graduating MIT in 1982. I also have a former colleague who worked at Fairchild Industries with Bob and his wife Carol, who have written about this, and you can find his statement and written testimony and affidavit online. He claims that he worked with Bob at Fairchild Industries in 1982, when Bob was supposedly, in California, when Bob was supposedly going to MIT up in Cambridge, Mass, on the other side of the country, 2,500 miles away. So there's conflict in the story.
Okay, yeah. Well, I know there's been many people that have looked into Bob's past, including George Knapp, Jeremy Corbell, and a few others like Stanton Freeman, and there are no certificates apparently. But Jeremy Corbell did say that we, and so did Bob in the movie, that we shouldn't be looking too much into their past. We should be concentrating on what Bob's got to say about what he witnessed at Area 51, or S4.
Yeah, it's kind of like the old, magician's sleight of hand trick. It's don't look at what the other hand's doing, and just focus on the magic trick. Don't focus on how the magic trick's being performed. Just kind of look at the magic trick, and that's it. And also, I want to point out that I think I'm looking up now. That I think Carol Lazar did die in Las Vegas, not California. I think they had moved. It was at 1933 Angra in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Right. Okay.
So.
Okay. I'm sure I heard on one of the interviews he did in the past that when Bob left that house, he kind of left all the memories there basically as well, and potentially left his certificates there. But yeah, I'm not too sure how much I buy that.
Right, the certificates that he could have easily manufactured and printed out with his photo processing company that he ran out of the same location, and it would have been hard to take an existing degree from Caltech or MIT and just change the name on it, and but
Well,
then again,
well, here's the thing, right? I mean, when George Knapp looked into Bob Lazar, he said that he met people that, or he traced people down that were taking him to MIT or Caltech. I think it was Caltech that would drop him off at. Right?
yeah, he had a friend that he had that would drop him off at the library at Caltech, but that doesn't mean he went to school there. To go to the MIT library all the time, it's an excellent resource, a great place to do research. They have a lot of
right. So this guy's probably self-taught.
Jim Tagliani was the guy.
Jim Tagliani. Now, didn't Jeremy Corbell trace him down? Dan.
Here's the thing about Jim Tagliani. Jim Tagliani also worked at the Tonopah Test Range. Bob Lazar's second wife, Tracy Lazar, her father, Don Merck, worked at the Tonopah Test Range as well. The real S4, as at Tonopah Test Range, the real S4 is a radar. It's a portion of the test site that's in an isolated section of the test site that they fly all the stealth aircraft over, anything from the F-117 up to the F-35 and all the drones that we do, and they get the radar cross sections at S4, which is plus test and train range. The word S4 already been passed around, and another thing about degrees and stuff like that, I have that Stanford blanket up on purpose over my window right here. Does that mean I went there? No, I didn't. Just pointing that out. Anyone can say they went to any school at any time, but get on Facebook and find some colleagues. Being dropped off at the library means nothing. I can go to the library at the college down the street from my house anytime I want and look through their whatever books they have. Jim Tagliani is the one that says he dropped Bob off the library. But from what I understand, he didn't meet him until he had moved to Las Vegas.
I mean, Jeremy, you've been to some of these prestigious places, and you could just walk into some of the classes, can't you? At the beginning parts of the years when these courses start. Is that right?
Well, generally speaking, if you were to go to like just some basic physics classes at MIT, at least for the first 2 to 3 weeks, you could probably just go and sit in the classroom. A lot of them take place in these large lecture halls. Professor gives a lecture, and then the professor doesn't even stick around to answer questions. They have the teacher's assistant or an aide, usually a graduate student, there to answer questions for the undergraduates, and also correct their homework and other things like that. So it's kind of it's not as a formal, like a small classroom where everybody knows your name, and it's a lot easier to kind of blend in some of those places.
So all Bob has to do is get on Facebook and find some of your classmates. I still have my backpack from 91 to 93 when I went to technical school filled with all my books and my tests. I literally have it in the closet. I can go grab it right now. My degree is right through this wall.
Yeah, I have a box full of all my papers and stuff, but I can at least remember a couple classmates or someone. You could go and find these people and look them up, and it's interesting that Bob's not on Facebook.
He won't, because then he'll be questioning, "Hey, where can you show us one of your questions?" He did, and I'm just going to say it straight out. There's no way he went to MIT and Caltech and got degrees. I called MIT. I think, Kevin, you had heard the recording.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And wrote to them. They responded back to me by email too. I wrote to them as well, and basically told me that if he had been there one day, they'd have a record of it, and
yep.
Doesn't know how.
What do you think about the idea that he committed professional suicide when he went and talked about what he did, and that professional suicide kamikaze was the deletion of his records as well? Or do you think that's just, that's just, idiots coming up with those kind of ideas?
Yeah, it's just
Crazy talk.
I have my opinion. I'm trying not to I want people to make their own minds up, but this deletion of everything from his birth certificate to all this stuff. George Knapp was investigating a story. George Knapp had no scientific background and had no idea what he was getting into. He should have consulted with someone, because what happened was when you hear George talk, was hit with the pandering charge, and Bob called him on the phone and said that he was involved in a illegal brothel in Las Vegas. George says in that one video at the Atomic Test Museum, he says, "I watched my career." He goes, "Flow right into the toilet." He said, "I watched it." So then it was, after that point, it was like, oh my God, my career is on the line. The journalist became involved in the story way too much. And at that point, I believe George was like, I really got to save my own ass at this point, because why is a physicist, for one, rebuilding alpha probes that's so talented, it's such a genius, that they took him to S4, and with his clearance even being approved, showed him a flying saucer the first or second day he walks in the place. Certainly Bob claims that people were far more qualified than him, and he didn't understand why they hired him, hence the controlled leak that gets presented out there. I just believe that Knapp's very well off. He's made a lot of money off UFOs. He's on Coast to Coast right now. What is it, Sunday night? He'll be on Coast to Coast in a few hours. Probably gets paid pretty good for that. He'll probably pick up George Norrie's seat after George retires. George Knapp's made more money off Bob Lazar than probably Bob has. I'm sure of that, because George does the lectures and all that stuff. So remember, TV reporters don't get paid that much money.
Oh, that's another thing too. I just want to add one thing quick to that. That Friedman pointed out is that when I graduated with my bachelor's degree in physics, I got a membership in the American Physical Society and the American Institute in Physics. That they keep track of everyone who graduates with a degree in physics, and you automatically put in this sort of list. So Bob would be in that list. This is the same list that Stanton Friedman used to look up Dr. Krangle and find Dr. Krangle. If Bob was a physicist and he had these degrees, he'd be registered, like I am. So
yeah. Also, what about when George Knapp says that Bob took him around Los Alamos and had complete access to go wherever he kind of wanted, in a sense?
Well, obviously, if he's a TV reporter going in there, then he didn't go to any classified areas, because they wouldn't have let a TV reporter in classified areas. So whatever areas that Bob Lazar brought him to or had familiarity with were undocumented areas. And also not just that, but the whole idea of, where Knapp says, "Oh, looking at Bob going to Los Alamos, he was like a rabbit in his own hole, a rabbit in his den, a rabbit in his burrow," or whatever he said. It makes sense, because he was going there every 6 weeks, and I mean, he worked there. He obviously worked there.
But here's the thing: when Bob took Knapp around Los Alamos, this was after Bob coming out as a whistleblower. Surely that was. No?
Oh, no, wait a minute.
Yes.
Yeah, it would have had to have been, yeah.
Yeah, it would have had to have been. So how did Bob still have the access to go into there? But I think it's more like what you're saying, Jeremy. It's more like because he was a TV host, he got the access that way, maybe.
No, I can answer that. Listen, the Alpha probes, Bob started, and that's why him and John Lear were doing them together. They both lived in Las Vegas, down the street from one another. The Alpha probes contract, Bob started, it was far more efficient for Bob to do them on his own as a subcontractor than it was for him to go to work at Los Alamos and do these. It was cheaper for them. It's logistics also. It became cheaper for him to be the guy that did them, and he had the contract to rebuild them. And that's another point. Why would a physicist leave Los Alamos that's straight out of school? Why'd he quit?
Why did he quit? That's a very good point. So what we're saying here, he was doing those alpha probes for a while. He'd been doing the alpha probe contract for
years.
So is it possible that with the alpha probes he actually was No, he must have been contracting to Los Alamos at the very early stages with the alpha probes. But you're saying that he actually. What was he doing to still have access to take George Knapp around? He was still doing the alpha probes to Los Alamos.
He was going in and out of there. He was going in and out of there to get the probes, and then the ones rebuilt to deliver. Going back and forth every 6 weeks. He had a relationship with them, obviously. And
if he's just going there for every 6 weeks, just going there for the day to drop off these alpha probes, that doesn't explain how he'd be invited, as Dr. Krangel said, invited to go to those security briefings, because I don't think those kind of security briefings would be extended to somebody who's just showing up once every 6 weeks.
That was only in 1982 he was involved in those security briefings. He wasn't at Los Alamos long. There's no question Bob worked in Los Alamos. It's who did Bob work for? You can work at the lab. That doesn't mean you work for them. I've done the same thing.
So this is what I'm saying. Did the alpha probes? Was he working for Los Alamos doing something else to begin with, and the alpha probes came later on?
He was hired as an electronics technician through Kirkmeyer Corporation. We have the ad for the actual job. Then somewhere along the line, he supposedly was working in the Mason Physics building, which is not a classified portion of the building, and that's where he took George Knapp through. And Stanton Friedman even brings that up when he's arguing with Jeremy Corbell on stage. That's not a classified portion of the facility. You will never ever take anyone, I don't care who they are, a news crew, through a classified section of Los Alamos and just walk them around and say, hey, here, it's not going to happen, man. It's not. There's no freaking way.
No. So let's move this forward then. So before he gets the job at Area 51, and we'll move into that, there was some activity that Bob was doing that would have put a dark patch on him in the sense of getting clearance to get such a job, or the credibility to get such a job, because he was running. He had brought a brothel, was it?
Yeah. Well, in 1986, he had filed for bankruptcy, and in that bankruptcy claim, it's listed that he borrowed, a couple, several large sums of money, several thousands of dollars from hundreds. Yeah, from a variety of people, including family and friends and family members and stuff. And that immediately, that kind of thing would be a huge red flag for a human resources or background check into someone to be recruiting into classified programs, because anyone who's got debts, irresponsible with money, and has that kind of, borrowing large amounts of money and has that kind of thing, they're a target for espionage. Obviously,
But the brothel never came out until after he came out as a whistleblower, because there was a reason for that, which we'll get into later on. But on the face of it, no one knew that Bob owned a brothel. But the intelligence services should have known that when they done the security check.
They would have figured it out. I'm sure they would have had. I remember I had a neighbor of mine across the street that went to go work in Washington. I forget what agency or whatever they hired him, but I remember they had a guy from Washington come up and interview everyone in the neighborhood. He went door to door and just asked, what do you know about so-and-so across the street? What can you tell us about him? And they went and asked us questions in our neighborhood. Yeah. And I'm sure they probably hire guys to follow him around for a week, just to see where he goes and what he does and what kind of people he hangs out with and talks to, just to make sure, everything's cool. They do stuff like that. It's part of the thing, and it's an 8-month process, generally. and it's very extensive. They go and talk to everybody from your past, like that they can find anything they can dig up on you. It's pretty thorough to get it
you
covered.
you would have thought his connection with John Lear would have showed up there as well at that time.
Well, it did. He admits to that in the interview with EG&G, they asked him about his connection with John Lear. And they said, "What are you doing with this John Lear fellow?" And he likes to stick his nose in places it doesn't belong. And and as the interview with John says, Bob also said, well, he didn't tell him is that I also like to stick my nose in places that it doesn't belong. Well, I'm pretty sure that these guys, would have seen that, would have known what his intentions were, or known that he's, doing this, he's doing that. He's definitely, trying to stick his nose in a place.
So
that right there.
Sure. So EG&G was the company which was the company he got hired for in the end that took him out apparently to S4.
Right. EG&G is the primary military contractor that does the work at Area 51. So it's like if you worked at Area 51, you'd be employed by EG&G. That's what his 1099, his W-2s should have said. Should have been from EG&G. That's the company.
But they were from instead? They were from
United States Department of Naval Intelligence, which was closed in 1945, I believe, after World War II, 45 or 46, and it was replaced with the Office of Naval Intelligence, or the ONI. So
that could have been
faked. It's a lot of the stuff that Bob faked it comes from UFO lore. It comes right from the MJ-12 the MJ-12 thing, the MJ-12 that appeared on his thing. Corvette in the original Bob Lazar tapes with his license plate was MJ-12. He knew all about all that stuff that was popular at the time, and part of the MJ-12 documents it says that it was all set up by the United States Department of Naval Intelligence. So I think that's where he got that element from, the United States Department of Naval Intelligence. He put that together, and then only later when he figured out it was EG&G, he had already put out the W-2, and it was too late at that point to change it, and he just kept going with that that original story that this defunct Department of the Navy that's still operating in secret now. It's kind of it's interesting. It's plausible that the United States Department of Naval Intelligence might still exist in some informal capacity. I just don't know that they would do it like that. Generally, from my experience with a lot of the classified programs, is it's done by private contractors. They move it away from the government. They don't want anything touched by the government. They want it all in private contractors, and that's what the restructuring. That's the kind of restructuring that we saw with the CIA when in 1976 when. George Herbert Walker Bush was placed as the director right in time for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, was investigating the CIA for all these murders that had happened, high political profile murders, and they had appointed guy George H.W. Bush to clean up quote the CIA at that time, and essentially from Russ Baker's work, what Russ Baker shows that he did during that time was literally move all these classified organizations within the CIA into the private sector, completely out of the hands of the government, so that you can't find that information with a FOIA anymore. You can't. It doesn't come back. Nothing comes back.
Doesn't come back. No. And there was a guy called Dr. Edward Teller who apparently met Bob on the 20th of June 1982 at Los Alamos, and he was the one that sort of put a good word in 1988 for Bob. At EG&G for the hiring of Bob to Area 51 in the end. What do you guys think of that?
Zero proof.
It's interesting.
There's zero proof he worked at Area 51. There's zero proof that Edward Teller would put any word in for this guy. In order for Bob to be who he claimed he was at S4, which was a senior staff physicist, you have to be a physicist first to take on that job. What we are led to believe is that the government is so screwed up that for the most classified program in the history of humankind, for sure, their 9 alien spacecraft, that they made just a big mistake and a big blunder, a check on Bob, which I don't believe, because just to get a top secret security clearance takes a year alone. And
Regardless if you
same
have like Edward Teller's
Majestic,
blessing or not. Yeah.
yeah,
You still have
Majestic
to.
clearance 38 levels above top secret. So supposedly Edward Teller can just make this phone call and, oh yeah, I know him. It's all good.
It's
No,
interesting because Tom Hood totally believes that Teller and Bob Lazar met, and that Teller he believes the whole thing about Teller. There's no again, I agree with Dan. There's no hard evidence for it either way. The most evidence that Corbell and his camp have put out is this one interview where they have with Dr. Teller, where he's briefly asked about his, connection with Bob Lazar, what he has to say about Bob Lazar, and Teller sort of clams up and he's just like rolls his eyes at the whole thing and just says, I'm not even going to talk about that guy. I don't even want to say,
him 3 times, and then he showed the final portion on camera. He was insulted. The guy was insulted, man. I mean,
yeah,
he just kept asking him, and he told him, Edward Teller was like 85 years old. Do you think he's going to remember, Bob from freaking a lecture he gave wait a minute. Yeah, it was at least 7-8 years prior in 82. I probably did meet him at the lecture. There's no doubt about that, but that he doesn't mean he knew him.
Yeah. And he know of the case. He's familiar enough with the case to be like, it's basically like, it's basically the same response I've gotten from every I wrote the MIT nuclear physics department. I wrote a lot of these people. I've tried to approach these people and talk to them. No one wants to talk about any of this on record. They don't want to be associated with it. It's like career suicide almost. It's kind of like the way I explain it to these kids who are interested in studying this stuff. It's like, look what I did, suicide, by getting myself involved with this kind of stuff rather than going into real physics stuff. It's like, you're not going to get these people to talk. And I've had some of them, just tell me things, like just off the record, approach me and be like, it's like too stupid for them to like entertain, basically, is what it is. It's
Well, when Corbell, was interviewing Krengel did say that he'd watched the Bob Lazar tapes many years ago, and he actually thought that there may be some validity in what Bob was actually saying, and that there may be something to that, and that Krengel had actually contacted Bob in the past when Bob had United Nuclear, when they'd been talking and stuff like that, and Krengel sees him as a physicist.
Krengel and Bob might be buddies. We don't know. We don't know. Bob lived in Los Alamos for a couple of years. They might be buddies. It just
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
I mean, in the science community, he used to have Desert Blast in Las Vegas, man. He was the Imogene Huff ran it. I mean, he had connections. Bob had a lot of connections, man.
He drew a lot of attention to himself with that rocket car and met a lot of people with that. And then also, that news interview with the newspaper that referred to him as the physicist from Los Alamos with his rocket car. And, he made a lot of these impressions.
Let's just remind ourselves that newspaper was the base's internal. There was Los Alamos, internal newspaper as well that we were referring to.
The Monitor, whatever it's called.
Daily.
There are people I know for a fact right now that some retired from Los Alamos, some still there that were like baffled that he called himself a physicist that day because they all knew he wasn't. Why is Bob calling himself physicist?
I'd really like to get a hold of more. I mean, there's got to be more information though at Los Alamos for why is there no records? There's nothing. They said they have no records on Lazar at all. That in itself is suspicious. They don't have even have him as being a record for. Well, that's interesting too, because as that relates into what Dan was saying, is that you can work at Los Alamos doesn't mean you work for Los Alamos. They have all these other contractors who are in charge of all that stuff. So it's again, Los Alamos wouldn't have the records of them. Kirk Meyer would have the records.
But Jeremy, he was in the phone book.
Yeah, right. His name in the phone book said K/M behind it, but they conveniently leave that out in damn near every documentary. the K/M meant Kirkmeyer.
Yeah, so he wasn't lost contract. They had other contractors in that phone book as well who weren't, direct, doesn't, just because you're in the phone book doesn't mean you're a physicist.
Bob claims his paycheck came from the University of California when he worked at Los Alamos too, which I don't understand that one at all.
Okay. So just for the audience as well, and maybe my audience, what's the difference between Area 51 and S4?
Area 51 exists.
Well, Area 51 is an admitted base started by the CIA for clandestine operations. The Aquatone Project Aquatone for the CIA was essentially where Area 51 was created. It was a big, it's Groom Lake. Dry lake bed. It's in the desert. It's like a dried up lake. It was completely flat for miles. Great place. Is a natural runway. They have, I think, a 12-mile runway at Area 51, and tons of underground facilities with plenty of room and secrecy to do any kinds of classified research or projects that you could ever want, without the need for a subset of us even more classified underground facility built into the side of a mountain and a hangar and all that, as they claim with this S4. The S4 that Bob claims is a base that's built 9 hangars inside of a mountain on Papoose dry lake bed, which is about several I don't know how many miles, 15 miles to the southwest of Area 51. It's actually closer to the Nevada nuclear test site than Area 51, and gets a lot more. It has, according to the data I think we looked at, it has something like 30 times the amount of radiation as the lake does, because of the mountain. It doesn't have Papoose Mountains, of course, in the way. It blocks a lot of
where the nuclear tests were going off 5 miles to the west, and you can literally there's a couple of tests where Papoose Lake just lights up in the background. You can see it when they're doing the tests in the 60s.
Yeah, and a lot of the wind, it's much more shielded from the wind. That's why they picked Area 51. If you read the original historical documents on Area 51, why they picked that site, it was because it had more, it had less exposure to the radiation because of Papoose Mountain. It's on the other side of it. Papoose Lake, on the other hand, Bob says this S4 facility supposedly existed in 1988, 1989. He claimed that there was a guard fence, a guard shack, and a parking lot that he pulled into when he pulled up to this area. That any of the satellite photos from the relevant times and the dates, and we have all the satellite photos going back through all the late 80s and early 90s.
There's satellite photos of Papoose Lake.
Nothing. There's
the
nothing there.
Bob Lazar's good friend John Farrat had got Russian satellite photographs. I don't know what he paid to get them. I heard $10,000 to get Russian satellite photographs taken of Papoose Dry Lake, and that was put in the little testers model kit made by testers of the sport model. You can literally look at the thing, look at Papoose Dry Lake, and you can look at it today. You can look at the pictures that Jerry Freeman took when he walked right on the Papoose Lake in the mid-90s. The place has not changed. If you have a facility like that and you're running buses in and out of there, you're going to have a huge road. It's going to look fun in some aspects. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. You can argue with people till you're blue in the face.
When did they construct
in the mountains and you can't see them, even though we have Greenpeace in 93 walked on to Papoose Lake. There's photographs of them with masks on, for goodness sakes, protesting the Nevada nuclear test site. And they had and then from what I heard yesterday, they had a freaking, when they did this, they actually had a permit to walk on the Papoose Lake with really consent. And also, I said Freeman walked on there and he didn't have a mask and spent 2 days and 2 nights on there in the mid-90s looking for the lost trek of the 49ers, which was during the gold rush. And the plutonium's deadly when you breathe it in. If it hits your skin, it's not deadly. When you breathe it in, it's deadly. Cancer from being exposed to plutonium
without any respiratory protection.
Exactly. And it was in his blood, and they knew exactly what it was from, and he died within a few years. With treatment, there's not much they can do to get a heavy element like that out of your system.
But it's crazy with the excuses that the S4 defenders are coming up with now that we've presented all this evidence against the existence of a base there. They say that, well, it was covered up after Lazar came out with a story. They bulldozed the whole place and destroyed it, and it doesn't exist anymore. And that how are you going to see this super secret base that's built in these invisible hangars into the side of the mountain? And again. Jerry Freeman was an archaeologist, man. If they had dug something like that or moved the rocks around or something, he would have definitely seen.
Well, what about this when George Knapp went to the exopolitics in Denmark a number of years ago, and he's telling this story about actually Jerry Freeman saw a sort of triangle or a square open up in the sky, and there were ships coming out. But then when you looked at Jerry Freeman's actual diaries, nothing of that was ever documented in his diaries.
Yeah, Jerry Freeman, when he looked to the north towards Area 51, he had saw light, and what it was it was probably, I'm going to tell you my opinion. It was probably a camo guy pulling up in his Jeep and got out of the truck and took a leak, in my opinion. And it would have been it would have been just north of Papoose Lake, about probably 5-7 miles. There's the Tickaboo Mountains are there, and then Area 51's on the other side, and the guy was down around on that side for some reason. That's where that light came from. Yes, and George Knapp claims that a light came out of the sky and things were coming out.
A doorway opened up. Yeah.
Doorway opened up.
What Freeman said in his own diaries, and it just shows
he's just trying to sell the story to the people that still believe it.
Well, what about this when George Knapp says that many years ago, back when 1989, I guess it was, when George called up the base public affairs office, I think it was, and not S4, but obviously maybe whatever base that was connected that had a public affairs office. I'm not making much sense, but this is what he says, right? Nellis, that's it, yeah. And he phoned the Nellis base up, Public Affairs Office, and they confirmed to him that they had multiple S4 bases. Yet in Jeremy Corbell's extras in the documentary that he's put out on the movie, you see George sat there with Knapp, and they make the same call all these years later, and there's just a denial in the voicemail that's left that no such a thing exists. The S4 doesn't exist. So is Knapp lying that call ever took place? And what I find really weird is why didn't Knapp document this stuff with even audio recordings? Because it was back in the day when electronics wasn't a big, cameras weren't around so much. But if you're going to make those kind of calls to document Bob's background, wouldn't you have recorded some of this stuff?
Let me answer that. I got a great answer for that. Okay. First of all, Knapp is a reporter. He's going to have recorders. Back then, they used to take the recorder and hold it up and then click the tape.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm going to make a point here. Okay. I'm George Knapp. I call the information officer at Nellis Air Force Base, and I asked them, "Hey, is there an S4 that exists? It's south of Area 51 or whatever." He says, "Is there an S4?" And they come back and say, "Yes, there is. There's an S4." Now hold on a minute here. Bob Lazar claims that S4 is so classified that the people at Area 50 to know about it or know its existence. So you mean to tell me an information officer at the desk at Nellis is going to reply to a reporter at KLAS, yes, this place exists, yet the people who have top secret Q clearances and top secret clearances at Area 51 are not allowed to know about it, but yet they're going to tell Knapp about it, a TV reporter calls up. I call BS on it.
Well, what about the guy called Mike Thinkpen? Thinkpen, is it?
Yeah, he's the guy
Right.
who did the background check for all the people at Area 51. He supposedly lives about 30 minutes away from where I live right now.
No, well, Jeremy, Dan was supposed to.
You know,
Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Jeremy
Go ahead, Dan.
Corbell claims he talked to the guy to come on camera. Doesn't mean anything at all. I mean, it means that maybe he was checking into Bob's background to get to, maybe Bob was trying to get into Area 51 at the time and was maybe looking into Bob's background. If Bob already worked at the base and had all these people at his house, why is the guy that's coming to do the background check doing it after you've told your story? He had already did the background check first.
Oh, he came in after Bob.
Yeah,
so Bob comes out.
Have talked to the guy and stuff. I mean, George Knapp, Bob.
Well, that doesn't make it. That doesn't make it.
George Knapp broke the story. You don't do the background check after you hire the guy. Not in the government, you don't.
What's your take on that, Jeremy?
Well, yeah, Dan's right. They would have done a thorough check. It would have taken at least 8 months to perform it at a minimum, and they would have dug up everything about his past and anything that would have been a red flag or that it failed him on, it would have prevented him from getting that kind of job. And I look at it from like this scenario of what I understand about classified programs and stuff, talking to people who work in intelligence and work on classified programs, is that generally this whole idea you could have gotten a Q clearance, but the idea that they give him all this information with information on things that weren't directly related to what he was studying or what he needed to know. It's information that's that sensitive is on a need to know basis. It's locked up in what are called special access programs, SAP.
Well, Jeremy, why don't you tell the story of how when he got to S4, what happened to him?
It says that he was put in this briefing room for the first day and just told to read all these folders and just look at all these they gave him a whole stack of blue folders and had him read all this stuff. And inside those blue folders, was everything related to, the contact with these aliens, where they're from, the Zeta Reticuli star system, how they, all this information about aliens and stuff that would have been completely unnecessary or unrelated to the work that on reverse engineering work that he claims he was hired to do. So it's peculiar that part to me seems very peculiar. Why compartmentalized information of a classified nature of that sort would be shared so openly with a complete newcomer to the program. And that's again where I tend to put a higher probability assessment of a higher probability on the idea that he was up as a disinformant or set up as disinformation, because why would they show him that kind of information readily if it almost seems like they were setting him up as a disinformant to like it's kind of like I was joking around with Dan one night, but it could be very serious. Like what if to work at a place like Area 51 and to get through the security clearance, like part of the security in the background check is that they, for your first week of employment, they bring you into this room, show you these blue folders with all this crazy stuff about aliens, and then they bring you and show you a bunch of flying saucers for your first week there, just to see if you talk. And it's all fake. Just imagine they have a facility that's out there with a bunch of fake saucers and stuff. It's all set up to try to just to see if you'll talk. I mean, that I could believe a little. That I could tend to believe a little bit more.
Well, here's another point. Jeremy, and Dan, please step in if you want to say something to this. Why would they have? How many was it? 10 sources. I mean, isn't that a bit? I mean, was it an exchange program? 9 was it an exchange program from other countries? Was it exchange for gold or something? Where did they all?
Well, again,
I mean, where did 9 just drop out?
That's where the original the original story was, that we had recovered these things or found that or crash sites, or they've been given to us, or there was, but that interesting, that part in the latest documentary where Bob kind of hints at the idea that they were dug up. They're archaeological artifacts, that we dug these things
Yeah.
up.
Now
And
it's archaeological finds. Yeah.
I think that he kind of threw that in to really resonate with the big secret space program crowd out there, because they're all into this whole Antarctica, and that the government's dig
Very
UFOs,
good stuff. Yeah.
and that they're digging up UFOs out of Antarctica, and that kind of I don't know. It's just interesting how he changes the story up now, to say that that these things, he thinks that they were dug up, without really explaining why or giving any evidence for why he believes that. Just that this is this change of the story now of what he believes.
Yeah. To believe Bob, you have to believe pretty much. The guy from Vegas just texted me that I know knows everybody, and to believe Bob, I mean, these guys, believe that it has to be a controlled release. That the information had to have been leaked to John Lear on purpose, because of the fact that if there's only 22 people working on that program, these people would be followed day and night.
Yeah.
And not to make two. And according to Bob Lazar's own transcripts, calendar dates, and everything from the original BobLazar.com and his information we've obtained, memorychangeboblazar.com, he only worked a total of 6 days at S4. He wasn't there 6 months, 6 days total only. That's why he says in interviews, on a very infrequent basis. Now, the first 2 days he spent reading briefing folders that Jeremy spoke about. The second 2 days he was in the lab all of a sudden working on a reactor that could possibly wipe out half the United States. What training did he have? They just threw this guy on this reactor, and then the last 2 days he couldn't remember because he had drank something that tasted like pine saw, and all he remembered was getting on and off the Janet flight. Now, that gives us, can remember being in the lab. The other 2 days that he couldn't remember, they put him in front of a guy named Lane Keck, who is I guess a regression therapist, you would call him, a guy that pulls memory out, kind of like, you know what I mean? And he comes up and then says all this stuff while he's under hypnotic regression and stuff like that. Is Bob Lazar possibly a candidate of some kind of mind control? Man, here's the whole thing about Bob. I can't prove he's lying, but he can't prove that he's telling the truth. The question is, to me, at this point, is the government behind this whole damn thing? And there's two theories I have on this whole thing. It's just, I mean, it's difficult to read, being that we know for a fact that they have used UFOs as a cover story to cover our own clandestine programs for years. It
would explain why they have never issued a retraction or issued a statement like condemning or like saying that this isn't real. It's like they're totally like going along with it because it benefits them.
That's exactly
and
right.
If it benefits them, then who's to say that they didn't set it up to begin with or go, in the first place?
Right. Who's to say that actually Bob did see what he's saying he saw, right? And actually it was just all for a setup. But then if he did see what he saw, he talks about when he was there for the 5 days, seeing UFO test flights. I mean, who the hell was flying these things?
Exactly. Bob says there was not as much as a switch or a wire in this craft. Okay. Now I want to explain something here. Bob, in his IUFOC demonstration in 2015, he says that Barry and him took one of the reactors. Barry Castillo was his buddy worker. They worked on a buddy system. He says they take the reactor out of the craft, take it into the office, the lab, if you will, sit the reactor down, and they take a piece of element 115 and dump it down in the reactor tube. And when you dump that element 115 down into the reactor tube, it instantaneously protons start bombarding the tip of the element 115. Now, when that happens, instantaneously there's a localized anti-gravitational force that surrounds the half sphere that Bob claims he put the cap back on. He put the element 115, put the cap back on, put the sphere on, but there's no on-off switch. So as soon as this element 115 is put in, the anti-gravity reaction takes place, and Bob demonstrates to the IUFOC that Barry said, go ahead and try and touch it. And he goes and tries to put his hands down on the half sphere, and he can't get his hands within 2 to 3 feet of it. Just can't get anywhere near it. It's the exact same as if you take two like poles of a magnet, very strong magnet, try and push them together. You're not going to, it's not going to work. Now, my question is very simple, and I've looked over this case like no one else has, in my opinion. If it had no switches, no wires, no anything, and they're in the lab, and Bob and Barry cannot touch this thing, they can't get their hands within feet, several feet of it to remove the top off and pull off. How did they turn the reactor off? How did they get down there to pull the element 115 out? Because there's no switches, no nothing. How did they get their hands on it to take this half sphere supposedly off, then this cap off? And remember, you must believe that within this sphere, there is the equivalency to 10 hydrogen bombs going off in this little sphere. It's this big around, because anti-hydrogen basically is being bombarded with hydrogen, and a complete annihilation reaction is taking place. And it's being withheld within this tube. What the hell is that tube made out of that's controlling this? And the science of it is absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion. The science makes no sense. Turning the reactor on and off, how do you do it? Once that localized field is, who flew it? The thing's bouncing all over the sky, supposedly. Who flew it? What flew it? They use radio communication. And why was Bob, if he was the senior staff physicist, why is he out on Mailbox Road watching the thing fly around with John Lear and Gene Huff? Certainly they would have wanted him there for the test flight. He's the senior staff physicist of the propulsion.
Yeah, well, that's right, because he took a group down, didn't he, to is it near Area 51, where he knew the test flights were happening for the UFOs? How did he know those test flights were happening unless he was told that at this specific time these are going to happen if they were UFO test flights?
They always say that, how did he know? And you just see a light in the sky. It's a little dot in an analog VHS tape. And to me, man, there's so many people that have filmed the same thing. A guy named Sean David Morton, who's in jail right now. He was at Area 51 all the time, and Sean filmed something at 4:15 a.m. every Thursday night called Old Faithful. Old Faithful looked exactly like the Bob Lazar craft, okay? Until one night, Old Faithful all of a sudden keeps coming towards them and comes down around. They're up on the top of Whitesides Mountain looking in, and it comes down around over on the east side, comes in and lands on the base, and it was a Janet 747. And because of the way camcorders back in the 1980s film, which I proved in a video I sent you guys, and out of focus light from a distance in a camcorder from the 1980s almost forms, it forms just like what's seen on that video when it's out of focus. And that video can be shown. I've shown that before, and tricked people. Been like, hey, look at this UFO. Like, wow, that looks just like the S4 UFO. And I'm like, it's a daylight sighting. I'm like, guess what? Now watch the rest of it. And then I show them the whole video, and it's a plane that lights out of focus.
But that video had no blinking lights on, did it? I mean, a plane would have blinking lights
that
on.
That airplane that I show that video of, which we should inject in here. You couldn't see any blinking lights on that either because it's an out of focus light. And also, you've got to remember this: where John Lear and Bob Lazar and them are filming this thing from, if it's at Papoose Lake, the thing's 20 some miles away. They're 20 some miles away at least. I put that on the map.
With a 1989 camera.
It's a 1989 camera. They're 20 some miles away. I mean, my goodness, we can demonstrate this. We can go get a 1980s camcorder. I have a 1990s camcorder and go to my local airport, and it'd be interesting to see what we see. But yeah, I mean, you got to understand something too. This is over a classified Air Force base. There are going to be tests and lights and drones and all kinds of crazy stuff in the sky, and maybe they're not. It's airspace in the box.
Oh, just the fact that
they don't need these. But
I just think it's interesting that he's hanging out with John Lear. He gets introduced to John Lear, and John Lear is this guy who's been going out and photographing Area 51. He's big on the UFO scene and into all this. Who's to say that John Lear isn't the one that told him or knew about these test flights? And then he made up the story because the guy's made up a lot of other stuff before. So it's like
John Lear is the center of the wagon wheel. He's also the center of the Dulce story. Him and Ann West, aka Cherry Hinkle. He's the center of a number of stories, and the whole thing is that in the sky does not mean that's that sport model flying around. I'm sorry.
Just because you see some lights in the sky and they happen to appear on Wednesday nights doesn't mean that he had, inside information or knowledge that could, that's either.
And just south of Papoose there to the left is Indian Springs Air Force Base. Guess what? Now it's Creech Air Force Base. That's the drone capital of the world. That's where all the drones are flown out of, tested, everything. All that's right south of Area 51 off 95. So if you're looking south, which they were, who knows what they could have been testing down there as well. This whole place is so huge. Like, guys, it's a state in itself. It's Area 51 is the 51st state. I mean, it's kind of like a joke that's been presented before. I mean, zone laws. It's there. There could be a murder could take place up there, and you're not going to be able to. I don't care if it's the United States Marshal or not. You're not walking onto Area 51.
It's bigger than Rhode Island. That whole area out there. It's bigger than the state of Rhode Island.
President Clinton back in '95.
Okay, Jeremy, so I know you're getting tired right now and you need to get going, and Dan's going to stay with us. But what would you say, Dan, just before you do go, is the most sort of important message of your work when it comes to Bob Lazar?
Well, obviously I can't, I wouldn't be able to tell people to just like look at the science of physics, because without, a technical background and understanding of it, it's not that easy or straightforward to understand. So it can't really go with that argument. It's down to one of those things of discernment and what you believe and what you don't believe, and whether you put the same kind of burden of proof on what you want to believe versus what you want to disbelieve. Like the people that want to believe Bob, they should it's hard, because are people believing this because they want to, or they believe in it because of the evidence. And it's hard to say, because it's I want to believe this is true. I desperately want to believe this. I definitely want this to be true. I wish it were true. I've done research which I want to share with other people, because there's a lot better information out there. There's a lot more truth out there that this is distracting people away from in a lot of ways. I've done more research into propulsion and advanced propulsion technologies in the past 10 years than enough research into propulsion technologies in the last 10 years that I know that element 115 is not a very likely candidate for what I would put my stake into. If I had $1 million to put in a company to try to develop something or build a craft, it would element 115 would be the last thing I would be looking at. It's essentially what's referred to in science or science fiction as unobtainium. it's an unobtainium is basically any hard to manufacture, hard to acquire super material, which can be used for any number of purposes. It's basically it's unobtainable. It's that's the core argument of it is that even if there is this stable isotope of element 115 that we haven't found yet for whatever reason, that we've done these experiments with we've created 4 different isotopes of element 115, and apparently there's one that we haven't discovered yet that's completely stable. Assuming that we could create this and it had these properties that he described, it's still the amount of money and the amount of effort that would be required to produce any usable quantity of that material in a particle accelerator would be just it wouldn't be feasible. It would not be a feasible a well-grounded
absolutely
scientific or from an engineering standpoint, I doubt that you're going to get very fat. So again, it comes down to the issue of discernment. It's what you want to believe, and whether you want to believe, things based on facts, or whether you want to believe things based on, what your feelings of what you think someone is telling the truth or not, and also the sympathy that you feel for that individual that he's. It's a hard case. It's not an easy case, and again, there's no burden of proof either way on either side. So it's really up to you what you want to believe in this case is what you want to believe. But just
Jeremy, I just want to say, Dan's just going to stay with us, but Jeremy, thank you for joining us. And your website is
alienscientist.com.
Excellent.
And my YouTube channel is Alien Scientist. Again, I'm tired. I got to get up early and work, and I'm having trouble keeping my eyes open for this.
No, I'll let you get going, Dan. You get going, and thank you very much for joining us. All right, mate?
Hey, thanks for having me.
I mean, Jeremy.
And, we should talk. We should talk again soon. Do this, if you want to do a second part to answer more questions.
Definitely.
Part, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you get going, Jeremy. I'll stay with Dan. I'll finish it off with Dan, and just thanks for coming on, mate. I appreciate you staying up late.
All right, thanks for having me, man. It's been a pleasure.
Take care, man. Yeah, me too. Me too. Okay, Dan, you're going to stay with us.
Yep.
Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You hear me?
Okay.
Good?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah. So just to finish this off then, Dan, because obviously Jeremy's had to go there. Let's just move forward to the movie then, because I think there were some interesting things on there that really stuck out for me. What I just want to mention here as well, if there's anything else you want to mention, please do. But the FBI raid that took place after the apparently Bob is telling in Corbell that he's got some element 115 maybe, or what he did, if he actually did take element 115 supposedly from S4. Was he supposed to have taken like a couple of £100 worth or something?
Well, he's supposedly a friend of his at Los Alamos took some, and at Los Alamos he had claimed it was called LA1000, but at S4 it was element 115, and Bob claims he's the guy that discovered called element 115. You can do all this research yourself. He claims that was his big addition to this story, was that he's the one that discovered it was element 115, even though they had been fusing allegedly these discs together, let's say puck-shaped discs, fusing them together somehow and then machining them into a triangle. Which, another thing, Jeremy Corbell had stated that he was the guy that broke that part of the story. And as you and I know, Bob at the Little Whaley Inn in 1993 had discussed that form of how they put it together. He said they took a bunch of different discs together, set them on top of each other, fused it. I'd love to know how they fused it if they didn't know what element it was. Any company like Los Alamos has a material scientist who's going to identify anything that comes in there. There's an MSDS sheet that comes with any material that comes in there. And being that it's a heavy element like that, for some of the machining up, there'd be a lot of machining involved from what was shown there. It's very, it's interesting.
Well, what about the hand scanner? You know, I mean, in the movie, without giving too much away, but I am right now. But you know, Jeremy discovers that a picture of the hand scanner, wherever that picture came from.
Well, it's funny if you read about that hand scanner. They used them at Tonopah Test Range, Edwards Air Force Base. A lot of the Nellis, these Air Force bases used these things back in the day, almost like an iris scanner is used today. So Bob might have worked on these things. We don't know. You know, I mean, to me, that was supposed to be such this unbelievable discovery. Oh my God, the hand scanner. Well, it doesn't mean much. The hand scanner, they could use those at Los Alamos again. Remember, he had his father-in-law worked at Tonopah Test Range, and his friend Jim Tagliani worked at Tonopah Test Range. You ever think maybe they told him about the hand scanner? I mean, you know, I'm just, you know, countering some of this stuff out there. That hand scanner bone density reading thing to me, that didn't mean a thing to me. To me, what would mean something is if Bob pulled a chunk of that element 115 out, took a spectrum analyzer and x-rayed the thing, or whichever way he would want to show it, and we had 115 protons in the atomic nucleus. And confirmed independently by scientists that stand there. That would be like the ultimate thing for me. To me, I just, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and just, you know, obviously, I know from conversations we've had off air that, you know, Bob has refused to go before a panel of physicists. He's never wanted to be put under the microscope himself, has he, to be tested?
No, they tried that at Berkeley. He didn't, you know, show up. You know, and then parts of the movie, you know, it's kind of like when Bob's holding that beryllium. Remember when he's holding the beryllium in his hands, and you know, Bob's sitting there and he's holding the beryllium and he's talking about it, and then all of a sudden the beryllium, you know, Jeremy reverses the video and like kind of makes it go backwards, like up his arm, and the implication to me was mentally was like, is he trying to say that this beryllium, these balls of beryllium are element 115? See, there was a number of stories of how they got the element 115. It was at one time Bob smuggled them out of S4 in a lead puck. And then it was they came, some friends of his grabbed some of the 500 pounds that just happens to be sitting. You know, it's just, this story can go so many different places. I could sit here
and how would he have got that out? How would he have got it out? How would he have got it out of S4? You know, I mean, how was that possible?
Here's one for you. He claims he smuggled a camera into S4 and had it stuffed up in the portion of a chair, and they had found it. Did you ever know that? The little cameras used to be able to go buy back in the day at the grocery store, the drugstore, that were throwaways, and they'd have 36 a roll of film in them, but you couldn't, you know, you take the camera and have it developed or whatever. Well, he claimed he smuggled one of them and stuffed it up in a portion of the chair and was going to take pictures and bring them out. And, you know, do you really believe that? Do you really believe that you're able to bring something like that onto a base that's so classified? I mean, we're talking about alien spaceships here. Alien.
Well, what about the raid by the FBI that takes place? I mean, what's your thoughts on the raid that took place on the movie?
Well, Bob on Reddit, you know, he has that picture of himself up where he's holding a picture up. It says July 7th, 2017, hello Reddit. Then below there it says, I'm an employee of United Nuclear, and it says on there that they are investigating the death of a customer that Bob had, that a guy's wife was killed of mysterious circumstances 3 years prior, something like that. And then Bob says on Larry King's show that they were investigating a chemical that he had. John Lear on the Kerry Cassidy show on December 4th, the day of his birthday, said the day after the premiere of the movie, said that John Lear said that that was DEA involvement and that it was drug related and that the DEA stored the chemical there and the F wanted the chemical. And Bob kind of got into an argument and said, you guys are the people that left it here, or the DEA left here, you know. And then the element 115. So, I mean, so far we've got like at least three or four different stories on why they were supposedly there. Certainly, if the element 115 thing spicing the story up. Yeah.
So Dan, I mean, look, man, we've covered. We've been on here 2 hours and 15 minutes almost,
Yeah.
right? We've covered there's so much more we could have talked about, right, with this case. I mean, you've been studying this for many years, mate, many years, and you know the story inside and out. And you know, I've been all over the place with this story when I've been interviewing you here because you know it's still quite new to me. But I mean, where I stand with it right now, I mean, you know, it could well be that this is purposeful disinformation, and actually Bob did see these things and he did go to somewhere, but then again, you know, it's not disinformation, it's just his own disinformation, Bob's, you know, misinformation. What's your feelings telling you after all the years you've put into this?
Well, some of the misconceptions that bothered me is that, like, they said Bob never tried to profit from it. He was selling the Lazar tape, the excerpts of the government Bible for $29.95. You can find the ad in the Lazar report that Michael Schratt and I did. They were in the back of tabloids, the Enquirer and the Star, the UFO magazines, different magazines. Back then, you do your advertisement in newspapers and the back of magazines and stuff like that to sell stuff. You know, I bought stuff out of those tabloids already in the back where they have something interesting for sale. But we're talking, this is pre-internet, you know. So first of all, he did try to profit off the story. Has changed over the years somewhat. There are specific things in the story that have changed. People say, well, it's, you know, the story's never changed. He tells the same basic story, but it's not that complicated of a story. Science fiction writers write stories that are far more complicated than this. One guy will write something that is far more complex than this story. And does that mean that Bob made it all up? No, doesn't necessarily mean it. But why does the sport model craft look identical to Billy Meyer's craft, Billy's drawings from the late 70s, 80s? Identical. It's identical. Bob Lazar was shown the Lazar or the Meyer tapes by John Lear, as John Lear says right on video. You know, we showed Bob the Meyer tapes, and those were the tapes they got for the trade for the appraisal. There are parts of the story that can't help you think that they made this up and tried to make money off of it. And you know, I know of a specific document that's very interesting. I wish the person would release it. You know, the person, you've talked to him before. I've told you about that document. I've read it. It blew my mind when I saw it. And that document right there would show that there was money trying to be made, absolutely, for sure. But the person doesn't want to release it, you know, just yet. I wish they would, because it does put a different paint job on things.
You're talking about a document that probably links the people that we're talking about here into a more of a motive of why they were doing what they were doing.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I absolutely believe 100% that Gene Huff, are one way or another, are connected together in this thing. And what I'm saying by that is, Gene Huff knows the truth of what has taken place. Whether they made this thing up and tried to, you know, and it just completely went out of control, and then they're like, okay, let's try and capitalize on it, or if it's disinformation, because he's the one that introduces Lazar to Lear, and like I said, Lear is always kind of at the center of some of these stories. You know, it's very hard to figure out, and we're never ever going to know the truth, man, unless Bob one day, you know, is old and is like, you know what, here's actually what really happened. And it is interesting that the military won't freaking deny it. I mean, why? Why don't they deny it?
Well, that's, yeah, and we'll have to go into another show for that, I think. But and if people want to get in contact with you, Dan, I mean, can they email you or
just hit me up on Facebook, or I go by my real name on YouTube. You know, Dan Benkert,
which is
Benkert is my last name.
Well, listen, Dan, I just want to say thank you so much for giving us your time today, mate. I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing the information that you've been putting together over all these years. And just thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.